Welcome back, everyone, to Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper, joined today by my guest, Louis Cammarosano, the General Manager of HomeGain. Quick reminder, Real Estate 360 is designed to build the Washington, D.C. Metro's housing and credit markets one house at a time. If you ever have any questions, concerns, or real estate needs, the best number to reach out to us is 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030, or visit us via the web at realestate360live.com. That's realestate360live.com. When you're on the site, on the right-hand side, there's an Ask a Question button. All you have to do is put in your name and email address and, question that you'd like to ask, and I'd be glad to get back with you. I know that we've had a lot of questions lately on HARP 2.0, which is another government program which people are trying to be able to refinance their underwater mortgages. Actually, I think it is a good thing to bring up, Louis. This is something that I've been running into quite a bit lately, where people have their first mortgage owned by Fannie or Freddie, because that's one of the first qualifications that you have to have under HARP 2.0 to be able to qualify. So they meet that first criteria. But the problem is that many of those loans that were taken out back when, they also had additional second mortgages, okay? So they may have bought a home. They purchased a home and got an 80% loan from one company that Fannie or Freddie ended up buying, but then they had a second mortgage, maybe a 10% or a 15% second mortgage that was then with another bank, but it's not owned by Fannie or Freddie. So the guidelines say that, there's an unlimited CLTV, combined loan to value. So basically it doesn't matter what your house is worth. So we know that about 50% of the mortgages in the United States are owned by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. So that's really good, right? You would think that, this is really going to help the masses because so many people have mortgages that are owned by one or the other. Well, the minute that there's now a second mortgage involved, typically Fannie and Freddie are not going to service those seconds, and it's probably going to be, it could be any other bank or whatever, but it's not going to be backed by Fannie or Freddie. Well, they hold all the cards when it comes to that refinance going through, because you might go all the way through the process and find out, yes, you can refinance that first mortgage, but you have to get that second lender to agree to subordinate that loan to the new refinance. Well, the problem is that the majority of banks have the general guidelines as to what they'll subordinate to, and most of them cap you out at about 90 to 95% combined loan to value. So even though you have HARP 2.0 program, which says you can go unlimited and it doesn't matter what the combined loan to value is, the second mortgage most of the time is going to block the transaction from going through.
No, that's not because the second mortgages in the first instance weren't subordinated. It's because they may have been subordinated, but they fit the loan-to-value test, correct?
Correct. And typically, the way that those seconds are securitized on the private markets after the fact, typically there's language in there that basically says, what guidelines those meet. And, many people are like, well, I just don't understand why I can't get this to go through. They submit all the paperwork to their bank, and the second bank says, well, we require an appraisal. We want to see the appraisal. And then after they find out that there's a combined loan to value of 125%, the transaction doesn't go anywhere.
Now, care what FHA says.
Yeah, they could care less. They could care less what the first is doing. And the crazy part about it is, even if it's improving the borrower's position financially, meaning that their first mortgage payment's going from $2,000 to $1,500, you would think that the second would say, well, hey, and they're not adding anything on to the first loan balance. That's in most of the cases, but you would think they would say, wow, this is putting the consumer in a $500 better position per month. That would, pretty much ensure me that I'm in a better position to get my money. But that's not what happens. And they're essentially blocking a majority of these deals that could otherwise go through HARP 2.0.
You can flip it around. If they weren't, if the government wasn't involved, then you wouldn't have this dichotomy anyway, because you'd work it out between the member banks.
Correct. And so many, and I think what happens, when all these government programs, they get created, it starts to, people really start to turn to the government. Well, if you help Joe over there, how come you won't help me? You know, and that's really where we're at right now. And I mean, if through the whole election process, this is more or less what it's been. It's like, okay, well, you know, Obama keeps telling me that he's going to do more to help the foreclosures and really try to, you know, to stem them and not have as many of them and allow short sales to be easier. Well, you know, the bottom line is, like you said, Lewis, I mean, you really need to let the banks work this stuff out. The government, the more that they involve themselves, you know, it's people are getting more and more emotional about this because they're unhappy because government helped somebody else and they didn't help them.
And you know what the crying solution will be is, look, the private entity is gumming up the works. Why don't we just turn it all over to the government and have one standard?
Absolutely. Yeah,
that's what's happening with the student loans.
Exactly. I mean, you know, they're in control of Fannie or Freddie, and many of them have said that they plan on winding that down. That's not going to happen. It can't happen.
Did you see that FHA is now, the red ink is $32.8 billion? You had informed our listeners 2 weeks ago that they were down probably $16 billion. They just released that they're down $38 billion in the hole. $32.8 billion.
And that really just goes to show you who really knows where they're really at. You know what I mean? I mean, these numbers are...
Bear Stearns is sound. So is,
yeah.
Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae.
I mean, it's just really there's not much stability. But as long as you know the Fed's there, as long as the printing press is there, nobody has anything to worry about, and everything is just peachy. You know what I mean? Just take the risks, keep forcing homeownership out there, and eventually everything will take care of itself. That's not sound business. And ultimately, who's going to pay? It's going to be the taxpayers. You know, if banks were just to take and if the government wasn't involved with all these programs, because even when you're going through a short sale transaction, I mean, it's amazing how many times, you know, the bank has to do their due diligence to make sure that they send out this government program paperwork, and you can't move to the next step until you do this and this and this. So it's all that inevitably is doing is delaying the sale. If it's a short,
increasing the transaction cost.
Increasing the cost and delaying the sale longer. So instead of, you know, these short sales or foreclosures moving quickly through the, you know, from beginning to end, they're dragging out for years. I mean, people are amazed when I tell, you know, certain homes have been, you know, lived in and people not making payments for over 2 and 3 years. They're just like, well, how can that happen? Well, the government allows this stuff to happen by implementing all these programs and putting up, you know, there's so many different lawsuits out there from people saying that, you know, there wasn't a T crossed in the deed of trust, which now makes it invalid, and that the bank has to go back and give the person's house back even though they didn't make a payment for 3 years. I mean, realistically, you got to think about this. I mean, I'm all for, you know, getting things done properly paperwork-wise, but I'm also a big advocate of the people and making sure, hey, guys, you know, when you get a mortgage, you want to be working with somebody that can explain to you the details. What does it mean to have a mortgage? You know, what are the ramifications if you don't, you know, make your payment? Obviously, when you get to the table and you're signing 150 different pages and there's all this legal language in there, you need somebody to break that down on elementary terms. I mean, there's numerous people out there that 5 years ago took out option arms. Lewis, and I'm sure you're somewhat familiar with option arms, where basically you have the ability, they're called pick-a-pay loan, where you can make a minimum payment, you can make an interest-only payment, or a principal and interest payment. Well, you know, the funny thing is, they said that those same loans that everybody was crying were stupid loans. Do you think that the investors right now that are still in good positions that have those loans and their interest rate's only 2%, do you think they're crying right now? They're not crying, because they understood what those loans were about. The problem was that everybody wanted to take those loans just because it gave them the cheapest payment.
Right.
They didn't understand it. Those products were specifically set up in the very beginning for investors, for cash flow, because they might be renting that property out. It could be, let's just say, a second home that's going to generate more income during 1 month than another month.
Or
so
they're going to flip the house.
Yep. Or they're going to flip the house. I mean, so, you know, it really is important to just be working with a professional that can explain to you the options. I mean, I remember during that time when these option arms were so rampant that everybody was just like, hey, I saw that 1.25% on that sign out there. How can I get that rate? Well, let me explain to you what that rate means. Oh, I don't really care. I just want that loan.
I want 1.25.
Yeah, I want 1.25 because that's what my neighbor got. And what they didn't understand was that those same loans that had the start rate of 1.25, that 1.25 was only good for a minimum of 5 years, or a max of 5 years rather, and then once they added on so much to their loan, it automatically kicked over to an interest-only payment, which was then the margin plus the index, which at a certain point in time got up to 7 or 8%.
And generally, they were not for 5 years.
No.
That was the maximum. They were generally 1 or 2 years.
They were generally 1 or 2, and a lot of them were tied to even 1 month LIBORs, where it could change every single month past the initial fixed period of a year or 2 or 3 years. So
that was just to get the loan done, the origination, and then off the bank's books.
And off the bank's books. And you know what? Many thought that in doing so, they would be able to turn around and refinance in the next year or 2 years anyway, because equity was going to continue. The houses would continue to appreciate over time, and they could pay that loan off. Right. And that's the vicious cycle that we're in. But right now, we have fixed rates in the mid-3s, low 3% range. So what I'm advocating everybody now is, hey, take advantage of the low fixed rate that you don't have to worry about that thing for the next 30 years. And now many might say, well, I want to wait and see if they get lower into the 2s. It's not going to make that much of a difference at this point. And I think that the biggest thing is just making sure that you can make your monthly mortgage payment comfortably, where even if you were to lose your job, you have enough savings that you could pay your mortgage for the next 6 months or so. And I think that is a way to get the economy back moving, is not living above our means and taking advantage of fixed-rate mortgages. We're up on a break, guys. When we come back, we're going to give you this week market movers that, if you're trying to lock in an interest rate, let you know what's on deck that can affect interest rates when we come back. Stay right there.